myself, right?
She's so young. She's young. Started really young. She's a prodigy.
They hired me when I was 10. So, but and then I really don't know where it came from inside of me that I'm like, okay, I want to say it. I want to see, so I was just like, or children with incarcerated parents. And I really got this reaction from people that was like, oh my gosh, that's such a great topic. Yes, it needs to be done. And it was the first time that I really felt like any validation, or also that people were interested in it besides people who had been directly impacted. So, they kind of gave us a warning of, well, people change their topic. Like, you could say what you want to study, but just be prepared for it to evolve or change, or you might think you want to study this now, and then, 2 years later, it changed. And so I was like, okay, but I never changed, for, the 6.5 years that I was there. That was my topic. That was what I was interested in. And it really, I think, choosing something so personal to me was what pushed me through to be able to complete that, because I had my son in the middle of doing my doctorate. Just like all these different things happened, right? I was still working full time. I had my son. And I think what pushed me through was like this commitment to it, because it was personal for me, also professional. Like, I wanted to support my kids at school. And then like realizing when I started to see like, okay, this is a academic topic. But then when I went to look at what was being written, what was being published, I was like, oh, this isn't good, right? A lot of it was negative. And a lot of it didn't include the voices of the children. So it was like everybody they could talk to but the kids were included in it. And then just a lot of the research was, painting children of incarcerated parents as vulnerable, as, likely for all these adverse outcomes. And so I was really interested in doing a dissertation and a study, or writing my dissertation about a study that was focused on the voices of youth, working in collaboration with them instead of treating them as research participants or someone to study, but also framing my research in a strength-based approach, like acknowledging that this is a difficult topic for anyone, a difficult experience for anyone who has experienced it. But I wanted to avoid the trap of painting such a negative picture to try to elicit action or to try to elicit sympathy or whatever the case may be. I really wanted to focus on the whole child, and then what good is within those children and what good may have come from this difficult situation.
So instead of seeing their parental incarceration as a negative, seeing it as an authentic experience that really nurtured them into becoming who they are, the wonderful individuals that they are. I know as an educator that is not often the approach that's taken. So in my experience, it's been a child is quote unquote acting up, something's going on with, little Billy, let's say. So let's find out what's going on with Billy. And then through probing, oftentimes we come up with this knowledge that, oh, he has a dad who's incarcerated or a mom who's incarcerated. And then we kind of work backwards and try to support and lend a hand. But I've found in my experience that it's when the child opens up to me, him or herself, that it's a way stronger connection than me, quote unquote, finding out. Because often with the finding out, it's not the person who they would trust with that information. So now it's like, oh, great. Now they know. No, but prior to your research, I had not read any research that had a positive spin on having a parent who is incarcerated. Did anyone in your childhood, in terms of your educators, ever like reach out to you or in any way support you or your family during your dad's incarceration?
I want to say not that I recall, those years are far behind me, but I don't remember ever having a conversation with any of my teachers. I will say that I think that has a lot to do with the fact that I was, quote unquote, a good student, right? I didn't really get in trouble. I did my work. I earned good grades. And so there wasn't any reason for concern. And I think that's something that happens a lot with children of incarcerated parents. So we don't have an exact number on how many children have or how many children have an incarcerated parent, right? So the way that they do that is they might ask someone who is incarcerated, are you the parent of this? They have to self-identify as having a child, so on and so forth. It's even less clear in a school setting, because a lot of times we aren't privy to that information unless the child self-identifies, the caregiver identifies them, or the child is in special education and has a social history and the parent or caregiver identifies that on their social history. So we're, especially in a school setting, we're unclear how many children we have that have an incarcerated parent. Now, we do have some statistics that say 1 in 9 Black children have an incarcerated parent, 1 in 27 Hispanic children, and I think it's 1 in 50 something white children have an incarcerated parent. When we're not accounting for race, it's about 1 in 28 children have an incarcerated parent. So if we have a classroom, any classroom anywhere in the United States, we can assume that there's at least one child in your classroom that is experiencing this. If you work in a school that's predominantly Black or Latino, then we can assume that you probably have more children that experience this just due to systematic racism and things like that that feed Black and brown bodies into the penal system. So for some teachers, you might assume that that number is higher, but for every educator, we should assume that we have at least one child in the room that's experiencing this, right? So for me, no one ever thought to ask me this. And I think it's what you said, we're looking for something to confirm what's already happening. So no one looks at a student who they think is performing typically well and say, I wonder what her issue is. Why is she doing so well? Is it because she has an incarcerated parent? No, we look for children who are having problems. And once they're having the problems, now we're searching. Now we're playing detective, right? Now we want to know, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Often we don't look at ourselves, because I've seen children who act out for certain teachers or in certain spaces. We want to know what's going on at home. Are they from a single parent family? Is someone so we look for these things that try to explain the behavior that we're seeing. And for that reason, I think that a lot of the research does tend to veer towards the negative, or a lot of perceptions do go towards the negative, because we're looking for something based off of something we already consider negative, right? We're reacting to something instead of being proactive. But I think that if we were looking for good, if we were looking for the good, and we were doing things like universal screening, and there wasn't so much stigma, then we would see that, probably for every one, counterpart of, this child is acting out, there's another student who's sitting in class that's doing quite well that you just don't know about, because you're not interested in what's going on in that student's home life, because you're just assuming that it's good enough for them to function in the classroom.
So did you having your father incarcerated did not impact you negatively, you're saying? Not all, doesn't have to be a negative impact?
So I always like to be transparent. I don't want to paint parental incarceration as this really great thing. I think any form of parental separation is difficult, whether your father is in the military or the parent dies, or, there's a divorce, whatever. All these things are hard for a kid. As kids, our relationship with our parent is one of our most natural, our strongest relationships for a lot of us. So it is difficult. It is a challenge. It is an obstacle. But I think that parental incarceration is a little bit different, right? If your parent is in the military, even though they're gone from you, people think they're a hero, and you could say that with pride. And, people are like, wow, that's great. People are very sympathetic to divorce, and, or if your parent dies, there's a lot of sympathy around that. And kids who have an incarcerated parent, they don't get that sympathy. Often what they get is judgment and a tainting of their character, right? So people are assuming that they know about their family and about the character of this child based on the parent's incarceration. So that is a difficult part of having an incarcerated parent. Besides being separated, it's what society places on you. In addition to being able to see your parent or access your parent, you can't call them when you want. You can't see them when you want. They may be like, I know in my experience, sometimes my dad was 8 hours away. So there's all these different obstacles that makes parental incarceration this really tough, difficult experience. And I don't want to take away from the fact that it's not an ideal situation, but I do want to emphasize that a lot of the problems or a lot of the difficulties that come along with it are placed because of factors in the system and these obstacles that are put in place essentially to punish the person in jail or prison and punish the family as well. Essentially, you're being punished for loving someone who ended up in jail or prison. So I do want to put the emphasis that a lot of the difficulties are on the way things are set up and not just on the incarceration. That's a big point for me, because a lot of times when people talk about visiting, they're like, oh, well, we don't know if children should go visit their parent who's incarcerated because it's so traumatic for them, and they cry or whatever the case may be, and then they really try to push this narrative of separating them even more. And for me, I'm like, that's a big no. Like, we're not going to go there and take that step, because often, even in my research, when I saw the children complain or show emotion about visiting, it had to do with lack of privacy, with feeling like the guards were mean to them, judging them. One boy who was 14 said, they looked at me like I was supposed to be there, like I was a threat. The sexualization of young girls' bodies, like, oh, I have to wear straps this thick, or I have to take off my bra and I can't wear this, or whatever the case may be. So a lot of these things that came along with it have to do with the systems that we have in place that do make this a really dehumanizing situation. But back to your point, I did see some really great things come from dealing with this situation. A lot of the kids I interviewed, they had a deep understanding and empathy for other people. They wanted to help other people out. When they talked about which jobs they wanted in the future, a lot of them were like service jobs, or like I want to be a politician. It was specifically because when my parent got locked up, I had to go to foster care, and my family had a hard time getting me back, and I want to make sure that that doesn't happen to anyone else. So a lot of these kids were using their personal experience to try to help other people. So I do think that, yeah, I think there was like some, it allowed them to see, like, I felt pain, and I want to do what I can, do my part, so that other people do not feel pain. So there was a lot of selflessness that came along with this experience.
Wow. I think that's important, because in this space of the National Parents Union, I know for a fact that there are parents who were formerly incarcerated, returning citizens, and I don't know. Well, that's our purpose. One of our purposes in joining with the National Parents Union is to make sure that there is a space for parents who were formerly incarcerated, a space for them and their children where they can be parents. Because I think part of the stigma is also that, well, obviously your parent didn't love you if they went to prison, when that's not true. We're not the total sum of one decision that we made in life. And I think a lot of times people, those of us who are not impacted, well, I can't say us, people who are not impacted by the criminal justice system are very far removed from the realities of what that means. And for our nation to be so enamored with mass incarceration, yet to be so ignorant about the ripple effect of mass incarceration, seems ludicrous to me. And to think that a parent just doesn't love their child, I have a hard time with that as a parent, and being able to reflect on my own journey as a parent. Like, have I messed up? Absolutely. I make mistakes. Thankfully, none of my mistakes wound me up in prison, but God forbid it did. It wouldn't make my love for my children any less. And I
Right.
think that is an important point. And that's something that, from reading your research, what's the title of your dissertation with me?
Guilty by association, a critical analysis of how imprisonment affects the children of those behind bars.
In reading your dissertation, I was privileged to read it ahead of time, before it was like available to the public. And one of the things I noticed, the common thread was, most of the children had pretty good relationships with the parent who was incarcerated. I don't remember reading any like, nah, I hate them, I don't want to be with them, they get on my nerves. If anything, it was more like, well, people trying to keep us apart, that is bothering me. And what people say about my parent is bothering me, but not anything to do with the relationship with the parent. So I thought that even went against what I thought. which is odd because my stepdaughter and John, like, so he was incarcerated for pretty much her entire life. When he went in, she was, I think, 5 or 6. So 20 years of her life. And they have like the tightest, they're so tight. They have a really strong bond, as strong as stronger than you would imagine, stronger than some people who did not have incarcerated, fathers, so I just think it's a good time and in this conversation for us to reevaluate what we think about what makes a good parent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot of stigma attached with someone who is incarcerated, where they're dehumanized. They're seen as the vilest, most disgusting people on the earth, when you and I both know that that is not necessarily true.
Right. So I think that you made important point. Um, I think the final step for me forgiving my father and coming to terms with a lot of things was when I had my son. And even within, the first year or two, just like, this is hard. This is difficult. I've messed up. I hope he doesn't remember it. But, I love him dearly throughout this all. And I will continue to make mistakes. And so, like, there was a humility in that, right? Because we all think that we're going to be this certain type of parent and we're going to do X, Y, Z. And then we come home with a kid and we're like, yeah, so this isn't going exactly how I thought it was going to go. So yeah, there was definitely a level of humility in that for me, and an understanding that, you make mistakes and that's not a reflection of how much you love your child. And I think also, I just like to point out that, yeah, a lot of people in jail or prison have made mistakes. Some haven't. So, as we've seen with these protests, as we've seen with these videos, for some people, it's very easy to end up inside, a cell. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they did something wrong, or they, should be in there for as long as they were comparable to someone else. So there's a lot of injustices and inequities in the criminal justice system that I think need to be addressed. That as a child, I don't think you're fully aware of. Well, I don't know, these kids now are different, but I wasn't fully aware of, that really make you have an understanding of what's going on. I know one, and you're correct. In my research, I don't think there was one child. And again, it wasn't a huge sample size. It was a qualitative research project that was really focused on getting these stories. But I can't think of one child who said, like, no, I don't want to have a relationship with my parent. They were all interested in being in touch with their parent, keeping in touch with their parent. Most indicated that they would like to see their parent. If they weren't seeing their parent, it was because of the distance or the money or whatever the case may be. So all these obstacles that were blocking their access to their parent. But they did want to have a relationship with them. They did view their parent in these really positive ways. And sometimes, you weren't sure if they were telling stories that they remember or that they heard about their parent, but you could see that they thought highly of their parent, despite any flaws someone else might perceive. But one thing I did notice, especially with one of the girls, was that she tended to other her father from the other people who were incarcerated, right? Like, my dad's not a bad person. They might be bad people. So she was grappling with what she has been told about people who are in jail, but still holding her father in this space that he's still on this pedestal. So, like, I don't know what these people are doing or what they've done. They may be bad people, but my dad's not a bad people. And I think a lot of that has to do with, like, what we feed children about jails and prisons and the type of people, that's where bad people go. If you do something bad, you might. So this idea that she knows, or she's been taught, that bad people go to jail, but she was flat out like, but my dad's not bad.
Wow. Sounds like a typical daddy's girl. Not my
Mm-hmm.
daddy.
Her dad was not bad.
No, no. I love that. I love that she could have that she still can hold, and I hope she does hold on to that, because it's nice to have a hero. It's nice to
Mm-hmm.
have a daddy you can love and look up to, who's there for you, um, that's great. you've done amazing things with a journey of, you've been given lemons and you just made this delicious lemonade that quenches the thirst of so many people. I've just been honored to be in your life. So Whitney and I met doing advocacy work at the Speakers Bureau, with the Speakers Bureau of the Osborne Association. And like really from the minute I met her, we were just talking, just in a round table, round circle, sharing out ideas. And I'm like, this girl is smart. She's a whippersnapper. She's really a critical thinker, and not knowing that you were actually doing research and not really knowing anything about you. And then the more that we've gotten to know each other, I remember going to your graduation. I talk about this all the time, and just the sense of pride that I felt was like, look at my little sis there doing it big. Whitney, Dr. Hollins was, and I'm very, very, I apologize, Dr. Hollins. She is Dr. Hollins, and I'm really adamant about people referring to
He's
her
really
as
adamant
such.
about that.
Yes, I'm deeply adamant about it. Because it's no easy feat. I personally have never done it. I don't know what it is to complete a doctoral dissertation, to defend it, and to do such hard work. I liked what you said earlier about what pushed you through was your commitment to what you were doing, because it was really your life.
Mm-hmm.
That passion project, that
Did you say
using,
heart work? I
yeah,
like that
heart.
word.
Yeah, it's a
Mm,
heart work. That's not my term. I got it from a woman, Georgia Hurt.
nice.
She talks about doing heart work.
All right. Well, shout out to Georgia. I like it.
Yeah. I learned about her in graduate school, and I liked, when I learned about her work, I said, I like that, because she talked about it in terms of teaching, that it is a work of art, it's a science, but it's really a work of heart. And any multiple times we need to go back and check our heart space about, well, how do I feel about what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
What does my heart think about what I'm doing? Because our head can tell us a lot, right? But our heart is what's really going to drive us. So as I sat there at your graduation, first of all, I was like running up and down the aisles. They're like, "Miss, you can't go any further." Like, I have to take pictures of this and the video. And
You
you
might have
were,
been the only one that got a video. You're so close.
girl, I got it. I was, excuse me, excuse me. When is this gonna happen again? And I felt like I wanted to share videos with your son one day, for him to see that pride in his mom, your dad, your mom, your siblings. Because for so many, I think the notion of a parent being incarcerated means like your life is done. You were dealt a raw deal, and so it would almost be easy to use that as an excuse to not excel to the full aptitude that you have. And you didn't do that. And I believe it's a conscious choice you made. It wasn't just by happenstance. You made decisions in life that led you to where you are. And I think it's important that we give our young people to look up to. I think as a parent, you are someone who they can look to as a real life example of the positives that can come when life, hands you a deal that's not necessarily not the one you would have chosen for yourself. But it's just important. It's important for me to celebrate you and your work. It's touched me deeply. It's helped to solidify things that I knew and felt, but didn't have the research to support it, because so much of the research around this topic was so outdated.
Yeah.
So as a teacher, when I would come across students, because I was outed by a student on a visit when my husband was incarcerated, and we both came to the agreement like, all right, well, you know this about me, I know this about you, where are we going to go from here? And so the student went back to school and revealed like, yo, Miss Duke's husband is locked up. And then they started like literally like coming in my room. And so I wanted to have some type of research. I'm nerdy that way. When I don't know stuff, I read about it. I couldn't find anything, Dr. Hollins. There was like nothing out there. Everything was old and everything was negative, really. And it made me start to function like those educators you talk about. Like if something's wrong, maybe they have a parent who's locked up. Maybe, because to me it was like, well, that's an area no one's looking at. Possibly that could be it. But your research helped me become more informed. Like, well, if you're concerned, be concerned about all the students because any one of them could have this situation, especially with the demographic of students that I teach.
Yeah, and if you're concerned, it's not something, it's, similar to the conversations that we're having about race. Like, you don't only need to have this conversation with Black students, you need to have this conversation with everyone. Like, mass incarceration is a problem for everyone in the United States. It disproportionately targets certain groups, but this is a problem that we need to solve. This is a human rights violation, right? For everyone. But yeah, I'm so glad it was helpful when I first met Vivett and she was talking to her late night radio show voice, and I was like, I just want to lay my head on her shoulder and have her tell me things, but also the sweetest voice ever, but like the heart of a lion who was fierce, and she's gonna speak up, and sometimes Vivett has to speak up for me because I'm sitting there and I'm like, and she's like, no, we're gonna do this. So always an advocate, and not just for me, I advocate for issues that I feel like are important, right? Like I have to get out and advocate for children of incarcerated parents and for all that type of stuff, but it's more difficult for me to advocate for myself. So, seeing you do that and at times helping me get through that has been really helpful to me in different spaces. But I do think, we need to talk about research because, there's some research that's taken more seriously than others. I think, people really want to do quantitative research all the time. They want these numbers, they want these stats, right? Because if you give someone a number, 40% of these do this and 50% of people are like, oh, wow, whatever the case may be, they feel good about that. They feel like that's legit. And some people consider this qualitative research as soft research, like, oh, I'm telling this story and I want to hear that. But, I would almost argue that besides demographic data, I want to say like finding out how many kids there are and where do they live and I really think that this topic lends itself to qualitative data. The stories are so nuanced, they're so complex, they're not the same. And I want to just share with you that when I don't think I would have been able to do this study if I wasn't in the supportive space I was in my program. Because in my program, they accepted the fact that I could enter this study with a level of objectivity, despite the fact that I had this personal experience. Some people will tell you that you need to be like a researcher in a lab coat who has no connection to the topic, just strictly observing what's going on. And that's why I really love what you said about heart work, right? Because for me it was, and in some places that would have been frowned upon. And in my space that I was in, it wasn't, it was encouraged. I was encouraged to embrace my insider outsider status, right? I was encouraged to use my personal experience to look at, I knew, and not to say that makes me perfect, but I knew what I wanted to have. It allowed me to establish trust going right in, right? Every interview I started, I led with my own personal experience. So I'm not just this person coming into you, trying to figure out what's going on with you and, looking at you like this, like, no, I've been through this. Now your story is different than mine, but, we share a common ground. So let's talk about our stories. So that allowed me, I think, to really get, some rich data that may not have been accessible to me if I didn't have this experience. And so I really looked at that as an asset versus some people who would look at that as, this thing like, oh, back off, your view is going to taint, your life is going to taint what you're looking at. So I really just want to emphasize how important that supportive environment was to me being able to even do this research and encouraged to continue and to use my own personal experience when I did it. And that was an extremely important thing. But for me, and it's, people could have debates. I don't really see how, quantitative data for children of incarcerated parents outside of, finding how many there are in their situation is really, I've talked to people who experienced incarceration like I did for 20 years. I've talked to people who have experienced it for a few months or a year, or some people who experienced it a year at first and then their parents were out for 10 years and then they went back for 2 years. Is different than if you experience at 6 months and you don't remember your parent going away. as opposed to you being 10 or 11 and now this person is out of your household that you live with every day of your life. You know, and the way a 12-year-old might deal with it is different than being 25 and so there's all these different factors and nuances. You know, I was able to stay living with my mom. My parents were already separated when my father was incarcerated. So yes, he was gone, but it's not like someone who was in the home daily was now missing. But there are other people who now have to go to foster care because this person was their primary caregiver. So there's all these different situations that I really think lends itself to a qualitative lens, to really looking at the stories, the individualized stories of what these children are experiencing, trying to make meaning of what they're sharing about their lives instead of trying to get it to fit nicely into a number. And, you know, we've seen, you know, how I feel about some of these numbers. We've seen some of these things that have come out that said, you know, children of incarcerated parents are 6 or 7 times more likely to go to jail themselves as opposed to their peers. And, you know, in 2009, the national legislature came out and said, that's not true. We don't even stop saying that. And still I'll go to conferences and people are saying it. And so for me, even with research, it's like, what's your end goal? What are you trying to do with this? Are you trying to elicit sympathy so that people think this is a big deal? I need to get on this. Or are you promoting the idea of future brown and Black criminality? Are you telling people if we don't take care of this problem now, these kids are going to turn into criminals too? And I'm like, in a world where we already have to talk about Black and brown children being seen as threats, I really find that narrative detrimental and dangerous. And I want to back off of it. And I want us to be conscious, not only about making sure that what we're saying is true, but also that what we're saying is serving the purpose that we intended to. So for me, that was very important with my research. And so it may not be a study where there's 10,000 children and, you know, statistically valid or whatever, but you know, I have some very beautiful stories that are equally important that I think actually do a better job of shedding light on what the situation can be like, versus just getting some numbers.
And there's so much power in our stories, and it's so funny when the person with the lived experience wants to tell their stories, it's so interesting to me that it has to be vetted by outsiders who have no knowledge outside of what they read in a book about your lived experience. There's something just wrong with that. It's not meshing for me. And most organizations, there's so much now, telling your story is such a new thing. When I go to meetings, it's like, share your story. We want to hear your story. Share your story. So it's great when I'm sharing my story for your purposes, but what about when I want to share my story for me?
Right. And I think that that's important. I'm sorry.
Our narrative. No, it's okay. Oh, yes. I see. What is his brand called? Park
Madison.
Park Madison. That's right. Does everyone know who that is? Speak Your Truth Trivia. You should know who that is. We'll tell you by the end of the show if you don't know. Let's see if anyone comments. If you know who is on Dr. Holland's shirt, show them again, please. Please type it in the comments. Park Madison NYC is the name of the company.
Yeah, I think that that's important, that we're utilizing our stories and not being used for our stories. And I think that's an easy place to slip into because when I first started speaking about this, it is kind of intoxicating that, you know, something that you thought no one cared about, now all of a sudden someone's so interested in your life and they want to hear your story. But then I had to really be conscious about how am I using my story and what is my story being utilized for? And if it's being utilized for good, then so be it. But if it's being used for people to say oh, well, we had someone with lived experience on the panel, so we're good, you know, or not validated. And I think even for me, that's why getting my PhD was sort of important, because I'm yeah, I'm going to tell you my story. And then I'm also going to tell you that I did the research on this to tell you and then I'm going to, you know, people have entrusted me with their stories and I'm going to deliver them with care. And so I'm going to speak to you not only as someone who's lived this, but someone who's studied it and researched it and read about it. And so I'm going to come to you with these different angles that, you know, that I need to be at this table, in this seat, in this seat, and this seat. So that was really important to me. And then it's important to me not only to research it, but to be involved in the work, you know. So even being where we met and advocating and trying to be as involved as I can. I'm not going to tell you I'm out there every day. There's a toddler that lives here that's not running around right now. But, you know, just in whatever ways I could get in, I really, you know, and nothing is impenetrable, but it was important for me to try to build this fortress of like, no, you're not going to discredit what I'm saying based on this. Because sometimes it's, you know, oh, well, you're a researcher, but you never experienced it, or you experienced it, but you don't know everyone else's, you never researched it, or you know, you've never been on the front lines out there seeing what's really going on. So for me, it was important, like, no, I need to be in all of these spaces, wherever they'll let me be, because I need to know what's happening so that when I speak about it, I don't care if, you know, it was a qualitative study that only did, but I'm going to tell you that this is what I saw, and this is my lived experience, and this is the experiences that I've been trusted with.
Yes.
And what you were talking about, I think is super important, this vetting of stories, because, you know, when I was doing my research, I had this really horrific story of abuse at a school, a residential school for children who are deemed to have problematic behavior. And it was like multiple stories of abuse. And even online, when you search the place, you could find stories where people have complained. But I shared it with my advisory group, and I wanted to seem objective, right? Okay. You know, sort of like this both sidism type of things. I wanted to see objective, because I wasn't talking to anyone else. I was only talking to, you know, the person who told me the story. And I was like, well, I don't know if I use the terminology like claimed or whatever. And, you know, my advisor stopped me and she was like, that is her truth. Like, you don't discredit her truth while you're writing about it. Like, this is what she told you. This is her truth.
So it's not her claim. It's not her allegation.
Right.
It's her truth. Her language matters. That language can change things.
And so I always took that with me. Like, you know, I think sometimes trying to live up to what I thought a researcher was, or objective, or whatever the case may be, and very quickly got shut down. Like, no, this is her truth.
Yes,
that's her truth. That's what she said.
No one can contest it. No one can contest your lived experience. It is yours. It is God ordained. No one can't say it happened. It did. I lived it. Now, how I perceived it, I don't need to take it through your white lens, your patriarchal lens, or whatever lens you're looking at it through, the mainstream society deems as the only lens that's valid. No, not at all. The lived experiences of Black children, of brown children, of children of incarcerated parents, of marginalized children, they matter, they value, because you know what? No one has a problem eating off of those kids and their stories. No one has a problem with that. They'll interview them and give them a Happy Meal from McDonald's and take that sucker and turn it into a bestseller in the New York Times list, and those kids won't get anything from it. And they'll still be left in the same situations they were in. But now when a Black woman comes along, yes, I'm going there, a Black woman with her lived experiences telling her story, now there are questions and concerns and, oh, we don't know, is that research? Yes, it is research. And I'm telling you, it's the only current research of this kind that I have come across, and I've looked. And not because I know you. I looked before I knew you, and it wasn't there. So I was like, oh.
It was really amazing to me when I realized actually how intelligent and how just really, I don't even know the word I want to use for it, but it was just such a brilliant idea for her to tell that story in that space, right? Because she's told that story before to her family members, to the school, and nothing was done about it. So here she got the opportunity, and she was like, I could tell this story again, and perhaps it gets out to a larger platform. People are going to read about it. You know, so it was really, I feel like for her, it was this way, like, no, you're not going to get me. I'm going to share. I'm going to tell this story wherever I can. Like, people are going to hear me. I think she had got shut out of a lot of spaces. And so I really wanted to honor the fact that, you know, she probably did tell this story before, and people were like, okay. All right, like, you know, whatever. And then she saw this opportunity, right? And she utilized it. She saw this opportunity, like, you know, I could talk about whatever I want to talk about. Like, this is what's pressing to me. And yes, she shared stories about her incarcerated parent and her relationship with them. But like really something that was weighing heavy on her mind was the abuse. And that was something that cycled back in her story, the abuse that she suffered in these various systems, foster care, residential homes, once the incarceration of her parents happened, and how there were no systems in place to protect her from the abuse.
I remember the story. She has siblings. They were separated. Is this the
Mhm.
same story? And she somewhere, and she said she just missed her sister and wanting to be around. She would wake up in the morning thinking about her. I remember. I remember reading that.
And so I thought it was just incredibly smart of her to like use this opportunity in this space. Like, yeah, I have a story to tell, and I want everyone to know. And she's actually the one who said that when she, you know, she was already high school age, but she was like, she was really interested, and she had a clear cut plan. Like, eventually she wants to get into politics, and her main area of focus is like this foster care system, which is how she got started on this path in the first place. So I just thought that was actually really brilliant of her. And I wanted to honor her story and not question her story in order to try to make myself look valid.
Yes. Wow. You've told another story as well that I would like for you to share, if you're okay with that. As part of your research or in your studies, I understand you wrote a book.
I did.
Wow.
So I wrote a book. The book is called Honest Test. It's actually named for my niece, who actually experienced parental incarceration. My younger brother was incarcerated at a point in her life, and they maintained a close relationship. And so I just, you know, matched her experience and matched it up with my own personal experience and created a book for children. And the idea was to create a welcoming book that children want to read, not because, oh, it's about incarceration, but because it's just a book that looks nice. It, you know, Kiki Kitty did the illustration. She did a beautiful job. She's a fashion designer, but she's directly impacted. And on Honest, and she nodded to her father in the story. If you notice, on every page in Honest Test, there are birds. And
Yeah,
her father used to send her drawings of birds while he was incarcerated. And so the birds in the story are actually a nod to her father.
I didn't know that before.
Yeah, so she did a really beautiful job. And my main goal with Honest Test was to give educators a tool to open conversation. But I really wanted it to be a story about a girl who happens to have an incarcerated parent versus the story of incarceration. And that wasn't always simple. You know, I got a lot of encouragement. Actually, I started the book as a project when I was doing my doctorate, because I was researching for critical childhoods what books were out there. And, you know, Visiting Day is a pretty like gold standard book, but outside of Visiting Day, I really had trouble finding books that I felt like were welcoming, that I would want to read. Like, you know, and if I had time, I would have looked and brought them out, because I purchased some of these books. There were some books that had like animals, and it was like a bunny getting arrested, and then there were some other books where it was just like the cover is like a face on bricks and like prison bars in front of them. And I don't want to knock any of the books, because I think at some point there were no books, right? So the fact that there are books was great. But I was thinking to myself, like, is this a book that I would want to read? Like, it's not, I wanted something beautiful. I wanted a fun story. I wanted something that was relatable. And, you know, one of my coworkers bought the book, and she told me she read it with her son. And up until a certain point, he was like trying to guess where her dad was. He was like, well, maybe he's here, maybe he's there. Like, and she was like, he did not know he was going to be incarcerated. And I'm like, good. Like, I wanted her to have this life, because that's what we have, right? We have a life outside of this. I don't know if everyone thinks that this is our whole entire life, but we are so much like other people in many, many ways. So this is a girl who happens to have an incarcerated parent, and she loves her incarcerated parent. They're finding their ways to stay connected. So it was really important to me that it could be a part of any classroom library, that it wasn't just this niche, like, okay, we're having bullying week, or we're having social justice week, so I'm going to read this story. That at any point in time, you know, you could read the story because it's a fun story to read, but you could also use it for, you know, more serious conversations. And I was actually lucky enough to read the story at an ethics charter school in Brooklyn
Mm-hmm.
before it was actually formally published. And it was like a great experience because they had read it prior to me coming. And then I came in and I read it to them. And
Mhm.
afterwards, like, I just had all these kids like, oh yeah, I know because this, and this happened to me and my uncle. And it was just like this space of sharing. And I remember this one little girl, she was so cute, and she raised her hand. She was like, how did you get the idea to write this story? And I was telling her it was from personal experience. She's like, yeah, my teacher said if we want to see stories about us, we need to write our own stories. I was like, yes, you do, go ahead, write your own story. But
Yeah.
right, it was an incredible experience, and that really gave me the confidence that this book could be in classrooms and be utilized as a tool or something that children just enjoy reading.
It's in my classroom. I can tell you, I have 3 copies. So you're welcome. It's in my classroom. First of all, the cover is just so engaging. Do you have it to
Yeah,
show?
I have.
It's, it's just beautiful. So automatically, my little black and brown babies are drawn to it because they see someone who looks like them. She's cute, hairstyle popping. She looks like, hey, she could be one of our friends,
And her teacher
and
was jazzy. She was dressed, okay?
she's really cute. And I think people think like, oh, well, it's a children's book. What age is it for? But I would caution educators and parents to not get caught up in that. Everything is not about a Lexile level or reading score. This is a Lexile can be measured by the topic as well. And so, because the topic is very rich, is very highbrow, is not something that we necessarily think about approaching in an ABC 1, 2, 3 book, it makes it disarms the reader from hearing about something that is challenging. So it's wonderful. I'm not going to give the whole story away, but the premise of the book is a girl who's like studying for her spelling test. That's really what the book is about, and her being excited to share with her family about how well she's doing in school. And the kids love it so much. Can I tell you, like, they read, it's a classroom favorite. It's a quick read, sometimes for independent reading. Like, I know they read it 5 times already. It's okay. Read it again, look through the pictures. I think it's important that when we think about building our libraries, whether they be in the classroom or whether they be in our homes, that we follow the suit of representation matters. It does. And if the book doesn't exist, you may have to write it. That's what Dr. Hollins did. The book really didn't exist. She had to write it. So now those of us who are looking for these books need to support it. Because I'm like just so happy to even have that available to a student. And do I know if the student's parents are incarcerated? I don't know. I don't necessarily need to know. But in some way, I supported that child. And that's really what it's about. That's a part of equity that's missing. That's a part of just the social emotional learning that we need, that our children need, and their families need. I actually had a child asked to take the book home. He read it with his family. This is a student that doesn't like, he's not an avid reader. Let's just put it that way. And now I could have got stuck on, well, that's below your level. And according to your DRP, you're reading at this level. I was like, sure, go ahead. Parent teacher, I didn't hear much about it. He did return the book. Parent teacher conference, I heard, where's that book? My son came home telling me about this book he read. I teach 7th graders, right? So he's like 12, 13 years old. I don't know what part of that book resonated with him, but it definitely touched him. So you've reached at least one student. And I think that is amazing. Like a project for school turned into a published book. Really great. Really
I'm
great.
happy to hear that. I mean, yeah, it's been a really great experience. Like, even doing the book reading at the library where John came, it was so nerve-wracking. And then, we had kids there who were like really asking questions and had these insights, and so that's always wonderful to hear because, that's the goal.
I think we're going to put together some book readings. I'm going to put together some book readings for NPU, and I'll definitely include that on the list for summer reading. Just things to keep kids engaged and to see images of characters that look like them, that have homes that are, made up like theirs is, and just things to help us. I think as a nation, we're at a really critical turning point, and books like Anna's Test play their role in just opening up conversations about incarceration in ways that are not being talked about. Because we don't have a problem talking about um, mass incarceration. It's a buzzword, but we seem to disconnect it from the human lives that are a part of this mass incarceration and the families that are incarcerated with them on the outside. There is little talk of that. It's always just, as you said, the qualitative part, the numbers and the figures and the facts, and they play their role, but the hard work is not there. It's not there, but you did it. What would you say to parents? We have like a minute left. I know, not a lot of time, right? But what are your closing words would you leave our parents and the National Parents Union and our viewers from Speak Your Truth? What would you say to them?
I would just say that any parent that's tuned in right now, you're already on a wonderful path of, opening your mind and your ears and your heart to different perspectives and different things that are going on and trying to stay educated, and learning new things. And, I always am clear that, you know, it's a spectrum, right? Some of us start in different places, but it's not that we expect everyone to know everything, especially about topics like this. It's just being willing to listen and learn and know more about it. So just keep learning. I appreciate you being here and listen to this. If you have any questions, you could always check me out. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter at DocWhitneyQ. I'm on my website at www.docwhitneyq.com. You could contact me via email through the website. And I am always happy to assist or help in any way that I can. So if this is something that you are interested in or you want to know more about or affects you personally, please feel free to reach out, because this community to me is full of people who are extremely helpful, and passionate about the work and just want to assist in any way that they can. So if this resonated with you in any way or you have further questions, whatever the case may be, feel free to reach out.
Dr. Hollins, thank you so much for being here. We're going to have you back on National Parents Union again.
Trivia time.
Trivia time. Who is this? You want to tell them?
That is Raymond Santana of the Central Park Five, who happened to just get married recently.
Oh, they did? He got married?
Yes.
Wow. So we know the case of the Central Park Five, now called the Exonerated Five.
Yes, the Exonerated Five.
Accused of raping a woman in Central Park in the 90s. He was only, I believe, 14 years old or 15 when he was incarcerated and served over a decade in prison for a crime he did not commit. And that was him at the time when he was sentenced. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Everybody have a great night.
You too. Thank you. Good night. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. And I'll see you again on Thursday, this Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, same place. Take care.